Uh-oh. Troy, they can see you now, just to let you know.
Okay.
Oh, okay, exit. I'm not sure. Apparently, I can't be seen. Now see and hear you both. Okay, that looks good. Okay. Okay, so it is 1 o'clock and we are live. So I would like to welcome everyone to this session entitled Teaching the Living History of Indigenous Perspectives in Canada. And we're very lucky to have Troy Miracle with us today to lead us through this session. So Troy is actually going to do his own land acknowledgement. And I'm just going to give his introductions. So Troy is a husband and father of 2. He lives and is a member of the, and sorry, I wrote down the pronunciation, Gondege Ganya Haga, Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, more commonly referred to as the Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory. He has been involved in Indigenous education for the last 24 years as a classroom teacher, facilitator, and he currently holds the position of Indigenous Education Lead for the Hastings and Prince Edward District School Board. In addition to his work in the local district, Troy has organized and facilitated an annual provincial Indigenous Education Leads gathering that is going into its 8th year. He has also worked for the Ministry of Education as co-chair of the Provincial Indigenous Focused Collaborative Inquiry Initiative. He has been a reviewer and consultant on several First Nations, Métis, and Inuit resources, which I can attest to. I have 2 of them, and is a contributing writer for the textbook Aboriginal Peoples in Canada, OSSTF Common Threads curriculum resource, Full Circle, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Ways of Knowing, and one of the lead writers for an online professional learning module on Indigenous history and perspectives. Most recently, he has worked with Nelson Publishing on the Enhanced Social Studies curriculum supports. So I am now going to invite Troy to share his screen with you and start leading the presentation. Is it working, Troy?
Okay, is that working there? How's that? You're muted, Aaron.
You're in. It's not in presentation mode, Troy. It's your view, so you'll want to cast that out to be the full slideshow because we'll see your notes.
Okay, thank you, John. We should have done that a little different maybe, but that's okay. Now, did we get it right?
Yes.
Am I sharing my notes still?
No.
Okay, so this is, I'm sharing the full one. Okay. Well, sego sego suego wahwanu warado. Troy Yongyat, Gandege Nigawageno. Nyagawa for the opening words, Aaron. I really appreciate that. And you know, before we get started, as Aaron mentioned, I would like to share the land acknowledgement. The one that is on the screen now is one that we use in our board, but I've changed one up here a little bit for this purpose because I know we have people from all across the country. But what I would like to do is, as we start today, I'd like to recognize the space, the place, and the lands on which we live and work and gather today. Wherever we are in Ontario or other provinces that you are currently in, we acknowledge that we are located on the traditional territory of Indigenous people who have tended these lands since time immemorial. We acknowledge this land, the people, and the treaties in place here, because the first step to reconciliation is recognizing the first people of this land and our relationship and mutual responsibilities. We also acknowledge that hundreds of years after the first treaties were signed, they are still in place today. The power and potential of land acknowledgements allows us to connect with our very rich history of our regions and to make it clear that there were first people who lived here prior to Confederation and who we now work in stewardship with to manage these lands with respect and reciprocity for future generations. I'd like you to all take a moment now and recognize the people, the ancestral lands, traditional territories, treaties, and communities where you currently work and reside. It's always interesting to me to do an acknowledgement because where I come from and in my culture, we do something that's a little bit different. We call it the Ohanagadekwa. And in that translates into the words that come before all others. And when we do that, we're giving respect and we're making that relationship. We're making and paying our respects to all of the things that sustain us. We go from the earth to the sky and everything in between. And we give thanks for that because we are the most dependent on all of those things. And when we do our openings, that is how we frame it. More now, it seems that we're doing these land acknowledgements, which is a great thing. But for those of you who are doing them, I just ask that you continue to do them, but in a way that is truly from a good place and not from one that you're checking off a box. That is extremely important because it talks about the seriousness and how genuine you, I guess, you are in your actions towards reconciliation. Now, one of the things that I always do whenever I present, now it's a little bit different because I don't think I've presented online like this before, but one of the first things I always talk about is terminology because, you know, a lot of people will ask me, a lot of people are confused about that. They're not sure what to say and what to do. And so I always tell them that, well, when I was born in Indian. I have a little card in my wallet that tells me I'm a status Indian. Well, as I was growing up, I turned from an Indian to a native. And when the 80s came around, I became an Aboriginal. So I was Aboriginal for a long time. And then in I guess it was the late 90s, early 2000s, that switched over to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, which then became an FNMI, whatever that is. And now it is Indigenous. So people will always say, so, right, so what do we call you? And I said, Troy, right? So, sorry, that's my joke. That's my, as my kids say, that's such a dad joke. But it is true. All of those things have happened, and I have changed. You know, I have been referred to all of those things, and some things not so nice too. But ultimately, you know, when we talk about terminology and people will say, well, why do you keep changing it? It's like, well, hold on. Who gave us the names? I was introduced, I'm from Gandege, which is Quinty, if you want to break it down, which is, and I'm a Mohawk. So first and foremost, that's how I identify. First, before I do a First Nations or before I call myself Indigenous, I'm first and foremost a Mohawk of the Mohawks of the Bay Quinte. So anyway, I'm gonna move along because of course an hour goes by extremely quickly and we never seem to have enough time to do everything. But bear with me and we'll try to get through this all. So the context of why we're here, you know, ever since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission tabled their report and the 94 calls to action came out, we've all been undergoing some changes. We've been looking at different areas. We've been enhancing curriculum. We've been enhancing our textbooks, you know, and it's been fantastic. But it's too bad in all of those other years is the voices of the Indigenous people. We haven't heard the whole story. We don't have a complete picture of what Canada's history really is, because for the most part, it was never discussed. It was one that was suppressed, right? Because that was the narrative that unfortunately the colonial government was trying to put forth. But one of the biggest things that I like to focus on whenever I'm doing presentations such as this is one particular call to action. And it is 63.3. And in essence, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 94 calls, and on this one, it's asking that for a commitment to build student capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. That's what we're really going for. That's what we want our students growing up in and with, that mutual understanding and respect. On the very first slide, when I had the territorial acknowledgement, some of you may be familiar with it. That is a snip of the dish with one spoon. That's a treaty that more or less between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people, where they agreed to live alongside of one another, to share the land in an area and to be respectful and reciprocal to each other. That's what we're trying to go for as a society, at least in my opinion, we are. And if as educators, we aren't working towards those things, I think we're doing a huge disservice to the coming generations. So one of the things that we also need to, I guess, acknowledge is that when it comes to the work that we're doing, and when it comes to looking at our enhancements in the curriculum, it's not just about including more facts and more dates. Yes, they're important for sure, but it's really about sharing that full narrative, as I mentioned. And some people will say, well, how are we supposed to share some of these things with the younger generations? Well, just as we would with anything else, we don't tell students how to do calculus when they're in grade 2. We build up to it. So we do the same thing with the work that we're doing in Indigenous education. That's what we're supposed to do. And yes, it is tough, because what are we talking about? We're talking about the colonial assimilation policies that absolutely are a part of our history. And we have to acknowledge that. It's not pretty. And I can tell you, being on the other side of it, it hasn't been easy, but steps are being taken. The government is making strides to do that. Companies like Nelson are not only bringing First Nations or Indigenous people to the table to consult when developing different resources, they're actually involving them. They're having them write, they're having them be contributors and employees of the company, so that they can present a full picture of the realities that are within Canada and the identity that is Canada. So one of the things that I was fortunate enough to be a part of was the curriculum enhancements that took place a couple of years ago. And when we talk about engagement, mandating engagement, I think, will go so far, but ultimately what we're aiming to get to is the motivation. If we can get to that motivation piece,
Troy,
yes?
Yeah, there looks like there's a problem here. Can we pause for a second?
Okay.
Aaron's just asked us to pause. Are we good to go, Aaron? We can continue. Looks like it's fixed. Okay, sorry, Troy. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm not sure where we're at then.
Can you go back to slide 6?
Slide 6. Is that? I think I'm on slide 6. Am I not?
Okay. Yep. I think so.
The mandated piece.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, more or less. I was just talking about the fact that people will, I guess, when it comes to it, what some people will do is they'll say, okay, yes, we need to bring in some Indigenous perspective, but what they'll do is they'll just do a little bit here, a little bit there. It's kind of surface level. And you know, a good friend of mine said, you know, Troy, we have to really make sure that people understand that when it comes to Indigenous education, it's more than sticking a feather in the curriculum. And I found that very profound, but very accurate at the same time, because quite often what I was seeing is that, you know, some educators would just, if they were doing any inclusion, it was just a little bit here or a little bit there, but there was no real depth to it. They might make reference to a date or a time or something along those effects, but it was very surface. So when the Ontario government took up the challenge of redoing the social studies, geography, history curriculum, they went that step further. They made it mandatory that different perspectives be included. And I have to say that the work that was done in Ontario goes far beyond, I think, what a lot of people were expecting, because it's not just the inclusion of facts and dates, as I said, but there's real connections to so many different areas of Canada's history. And not only that, there's great examples and sample questions to help educators get started. So the biggest piece as we go forward is, my question was around, is the mandating enough? Or is it more that we need to look at the motivating? So ultimately, that is where we get to, and that is the biggest question. How do we motivate people to get to that part where they want to do it, where they feel they have to do it? Because I'll be honest, what ends up happening quite often is something that we refer to as the perfect stranger. I do a lot of work within my board with a number of teachers, and often I encounter teachers who are struggling to include Indigenous perspective. They'll call me into their classes, and ultimately, you know, well, I'm building relationships and whatnot, and we finally get to, well, where are you struggling? What are some of the things that I can help you with? And ultimately, these are some of the answers that I get. I don't know any of this. I never grew up near a reserve. I usually just skip that part because I don't know it. I don't know any Indigenous people. I never grew up with any Indigenous people. I'm afraid of getting it wrong and offending someone. So Dr. Susan Dion, some of you may have heard her speak about this already, but she coined the phrase "a perfect stranger." And ultimately what she's saying and what I'm experiencing is that these teachers, and any person really, who they seem to take the position, or they're positioning themselves as someone who may or may not necessarily be involved, because really it's between the government and Indigenous people. So they're kind of pushing it off. So there's this, maybe it's a fear, maybe it's a discomfort, whatever the case may be, that's where we need to move from. And how do we do that? Well, we have to disrupt that kind of thinking. And we do this by asking, so what is it you do know about Indigenous people? And then we ask them, how did you come to know that information? And essentially, we are, by asking these questions and having these conversations, we're hopefully moving people to the place of motivation where they recognize that, oh, well, maybe I don't really know that much, or where I'm learning, I need to learn more or be more diverse, because ultimately, where have most people heard about information around First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people? The media, right? And let's be honest, the media hasn't always cast the greatest light on First Nations people, but it allows us to have some conversations around perspective. And I want to spend a little bit of time on that for a second. Actually, I'm going to put you guys to work on this now.
Yes. So if they are accessing the Jamboards now, would it be okay with you if they ask some questions on that Jamboard for you as well? Because currently CVent is not allowing questions to go through. We are on call with the CVent people, but it's not working. So if they could ask some questions, is that okay if they could put that also on the Jamboard?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's fine. So I'll give you, the Jamboard is in the chat, or no? I'm sorry, Erin.
So the Jamboard is in the virtual attendee hub on the description. So there's two links. The first is question 1, and Troy will indicate that. I think that's the one people will be working on first. And then, yes, what do you think Indigenous perspective is? And then the second one is for the second question. So the links to access that are in the session description.
So I'll just ask people to take a little bit of time just to quickly put in some of your thoughts around using Jamboard and around this question. I'm having fun. It's one thing when you live in a rural area, the internet is always interesting. So some of the questions, some of the pieces that are coming up, oral history and teachings, absolutely. Connecting to the land, ways of knowing, absolutely. Centering of relationships with the land and each other. I love it. Absolutely. Yeah, that is fantastic. And thank you for making them bigger, because these eyes are, it's a little small on the computer, so I appreciate it. But yes, absolutely. All of these things are a part of Indigenous perspective. And I'm really happy to see that people are talking about relationships, because that is, you know, it's key. It's key to who we are as Indigenous people. Of course, I can only speak for Mohawk, and I should say my wife is Odawa, so I have some teachings and some knowledge around the Anishinaabe as well. But one thing that I can share is that the relationships are key, and those relationships include the land. So when I started off and I talked a little bit about the Hanagadodekwa, that is what it is all about. And that's why we start there, to remind us that's where our relationships really begin, is with the land, and then we go from there. And there's so many other things too, right? And that's some of the things that we want to talk to here today. And I see we're quickly running out of time, so I need to keep moving along here. So one of the things that I like to do with some of my teachers is pose this question, and if we had more time, I really flesh it out, and really I'm giving you guys a presentation that usually takes me half a day to do with my teachers. But one of the things we like to look at is really kind of turning perspective on its head. And one of the big ones that catches a lot of people is this one. That in the colonial perspective, they use that word discovered, right? Well, from a First Nations perspective, how do you discover something that was never lost, or we were already here? So from our perspective, you know, Europeans arrived in what we call Canada today, not discovered it, they arrived. And then we go a little further and we look at these. What do you see? What are you thinking? It's a pretty iconic photo. What about this one? What do you think this is? And this one, another iconic photo. But what are we really looking at? Are we looking at protesters, or are we looking at protectors? We all recognize this fellow. What are we seeing there? How about this one? What do we see? What are you wondering? Is it vandalism, or are they art installations? So it can be controversial, absolutely. But when we're looking at perspectives, this is what I'm talking about. These are some of the differences that we see. Now, we had some pretty heated debates about these two photos here. For those out west, they may recognize that the statue of Sir John A. with blood on his hands, or red paint on his hands, is an actual statue that's in Regina, I believe. And some of the folks in my audience, when we were talking about this, they didn't know where it was from. And I posed the question. I said, then what makes you think that it isn't an actual art installation that someone just made, right? So it's just thinking about that, looking at things through a different lens. I think it's extremely important that we do that. We have that, the orange shirt is one that we have here in our board. That's kind of the board shirt that we have for Orange Shirt Day. And an art class in grade 9 went to Picton, and they put this shirt on Sir John A as a way of putting a juxtaposition on the whole thing. So it was actually part of an art piece. So when we think of it that way, it has a different meaning and a different impact. So ultimately, though, I guess it comes back to what we were talking about before. Are we mandating things, or are we trying to get to that place of motivation? And ultimately, I personally think that it's imperative that Indigenous perspective remain a part of the conversations that we're having, because if we're not, if Indigenous voices are once again being pushed off to the side, then what is that saying to the current people who are coming up? You know, it's what does it say to our resolve around reconciliation? Are we really trying to do it, or are we just kind of trying to do it? So if we're going to be serious, we have to keep going forward. And I understand that there's a lot of stresses in people's lives, and I understand that it's difficult. It is for a lot of us in education, and we're trying to make the best that we can of everything. So I am often telling my teachers, don't worry, I'm not trying to add to your pile. I know your pile is already big. I'm just trying to help find a way where we can embed and include and infuse this Indigenous perspective in a way that is going to be purposeful and engaging, and also highly rewarding for everybody involved. So, and often I'm also always stressing the contemporary part of things, because too often First Nations people are always seen in a historical place, and we need to move beyond that too. Yes, it is in the history, but you know, there are other ways and other things that we can talk about, and many of you just put it with the connections with land and all of those pieces. It goes beyond social studies and history. That starts getting into the science in the Catholic systems. But I would say, Aaron, to your question, it's probably more at the school level and teacher level. I always aim to have at least one champion in every school, and hopefully that one champion can help spread, right? But that takes time, and it's something I'm always telling my colleagues is, I know it's frustrating that it's slow, but remember, we're in a marathon, not a sprint, and because it's going to take time for us to get there. It just is. It took us a long time to get to where we are today, and it's going to take a long time to change the course, right? I always think of that ocean liner. It takes a long time for that baby to turn around. So we have to be patient, and we have to be resilient. Our ancestors were resilient in another way, and we need to continue to be resilient. But I will say, a lot has changed. I've been in my role for 10 years, and I've seen a huge shift, especially in the last 5 years with the TRC coming out, you know, Gord Downey making his statements. That opened up a whole other audience. So things are changing, things are getting better, but there's still so much work to do. And I think what's happening out east right now is a perfect example. It shows us how much work there's still to do, because the Mi'kmaq people they absolutely have a right to be doing what they're doing, It's been recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada. It doesn't get any higher than that. But yet it's still not resolved. There's still people, some of the commercial fishermen are still fighting against it. So, you know, I don't want to get going too much on just this, but I do want to provide John the opportunity. He's prepared something for us, and I wanted to have a look at it because it's really good, and I think worthy of people taking a closer look. So I'll start that video for us here now. I'll try.
Hello everyone, I'm John from Nelson's Publishing, and I'm taking a few minutes to share some examples of resource solutions. I can help you to use.
John, could we have you play it?
Yeah, you know what? I'm wondering if maybe if the audio is not great casting the video, maybe it's better to have me screen share instead, or to you know, just do a really quick share of
Yeah, you can screen share, John.
Okay, give me one sec here.
Should I stop screen sharing here?
Yes, please.
All right, sorry guys, I got it now. Hi there, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, Aaron, is that you guys see my screen? I have the Jamboard up right now because I was just looking at it before. But I'll get going in Edwin using the browser. Does everything look okay? Okay, so I'm going to assume that you all can hear me. My name is John. I work with the Nelson Publishing team, and I want to share with you today a great resource that can do the kind of infusion work that Troy is talking about, where we're going to bring Indigenous perspectives into our curricular instruction. So the platform is Edwin. Some of you may have heard of it. It's Nelson's digital library, and it's an in-browser app. So people who are using it would access it just the way I am now by typing it into their browser. Right now, you can try it for free for a free trial period. So do check it out. Individual teachers can do that. And Edwin is a full ecosystem. It has Nelson's published learning materials for students. It has in all of the core subjects, and what we can offer through Edwin is growing every day. What I want to show you, and I won't take up too much time because we want to get back to Troy's presentation, but I want to show you a tool called Collections. So if you're an Edwin user, you have access, like I said, to all kinds of online curricular materials. So if I'm teaching grade 7 history, which is what I happen to have in my grade band right now, I can browse all these topics based on curriculum. But another really flexible and versatile way to use Edwin is through what are called collections. And so we are talking about treaties right now and current events, and there is content on treaties in Edwin, which I can search. As you can see, so I'm going to pull up this collection, which is going to present me as a teacher with a great array of student-facing materials. So all of these items here are from the Edwin library, and they are from Nelson resources like Under One Sun, Nelson Social Studies and the Enhancements, and they provide different perspectives, informational texts, overviews, case studies. There's video from elders, a lot of really great content. And the collection also, provides teacher resource. So if you're a teacher user, you're going to see this sidebar here that has a lesson plan, directions for how to use the content of this collection. And then the students, when they access this collection, because as a teacher, the key thing is you can push this out to your class and they can access the curated material. And they're going to be able to use this stuff, use any other supplemental material that you assign to them. And it syncs with Google Classroom and Teams if you're a board that uses that. And you're able to deliver this lesson really effectively. The really interesting thing, though, is that you can also remix this. So you can copy this to your personal collections and adjust it. and you can create new ones using this material and bringing in new content. So if you wanted to talk specifically about that lobster fishery dispute, but you wanted to do it in such a way that would provide students with the treaty background that they want, you could go ahead and create a new collection using some of this content. Whoops. So if I want to use, say, this making treaties object here, which is a report on, and I'll show you what it looks like. You know, it's a sequence of text and images and infographics that are going to provide that primary sources and summary information on different types of treaties in Canada. There's lots more here that you can explore and check out. But just to show you the flexibility, if you wanted to use this, you could add it to a new collection, which I actually started doing this for the screencast that we were using. But say I have a collection in here, but I'm just going to make a new one for our purposes here. I have an idea to do Nova Scotia lobster fishery dispute. It's going to be the name of my collection and the lesson that I want to build. That's now going to be added to my collections list. I can add this by clicking on it. So there's now a collection that I've created as a teacher that I can start to customize that's going to contain this information. And I can add to that news items as well. So for instance, you know, if I wanted to have students reading a news article, it could be, you know, Scotia lobster, and I really want to use this. I'm just going to click the first one that I get, but you know, appropriate for a student. I can get that link and I can embed it in a collection. So I can add to this collection right here, this, you know, treaty collection that we're looking at. I can add a link, and students will be able to access that as part of their engagement with the collection content. And finally, just one more way that we can use this really great collection tool is you can take an existing collection. So Nelson has created all of these, and you can also create your own from scratch. But we've published a number of these collections in our curricular areas and in pertaining to current events, all kinds of stuff. But you can take an existing curricular collection or lesson and infuse it with something like treaty knowledge or any other Indigenous content that you might want to bring to that topic, whether it's science or social studies or literacy. I'm just going to pull an example from social studies. So if I wanted to do that for this collection on non-renewable resources, I could copy it into my collection, and I would be able to add and change this collection around as much as I wanted to bring in an Indigenous perspective on natural resources, for instance. And I would do that just by adding items. I can go back to the Nelson Library and type in or browse through here to find that content, and then have essentially a custom collection. Okay, I'm going to stop now because I want to make sure that Troy has enough time. But I encourage you all to check out go.edwin.app. Like I said, we're having a free trial period. It's just an exciting resource that is growing every day. So thanks very much, and back to you, Troy.
So that you know, we only have about 10 minutes.
So you'll have to tell me which screen I'm casting again, or if I have to switch it.
We see your first slide. So if you go down to the previous slide that you spoke on, and then I think hit present online.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one we're sharing here.
I see infusion through overarching themes.
Yeah, that's so my other screen seems to be locked in. I can see why people use 3 screens to do things, But I'll just continue on, and I don't. It's fine. One of the other suggestions that I've often used. This is one that I've used with grade 10. I know a lot of our folks are secondary. One of the other things that I like to do is, rather than doing the chronological approach that so many people seem to still use, is really looking at how can we get these overarching things where we can cover off a lot of time period. If people still want to do it in the chronology type of thing, but they can do it around issues, around a theme instead. And one of my favorite ones that I always use is activism. Just think about that for a minute. Think about how much our country has been developed on activism and the role that activism has played. We're seeing it play out right now all the time. It currently with the fishing dispute, we saw all summer with Black Lives Matter. We can just go on and on and on and on, including women in the suffragette movement in the 20s, right? So there are so many things that can be done around that way. These are just some of the things that we kind of pulled together. And of course, I was saying to Aaron earlier that one of the most popular things right now seems to be using choice boards or hyperdocs or whatever you'd like to call them. And these are two that I put together. One's for the Orange Shirt Day that was on September 30th. And then of course we have some coming up for Treaty Awareness Week. So those are highly engaging ways that I find the students, the teachers are really gravitating towards it. I heard more compliments and got more feedback from the Orange Shirt Day hyperdoc that we put together in this manner than I heard in all the previous years of information that I shared out. And you know what? Most of it was the same. So apparently using this format was more engaging for the teachers and the students. So that was something of interest. Lastly, John touched on it in his presentation, looking at that resource that Nelson has through Edwin is fantastic. If you were really looking, you could see there's hundreds and hundreds of different articles and connections that can be, and resources that can be brought together. And we've already talked around how there's science connections, how there's social studies connections. And these are just a couple. I have them from grade 4 all the way through to grade 10. But these are just quickly some of the examples that we have. So I had another piece, another Jamboard that I wanted people to have a look at. And I'm wondering, Aaron, if there are some questions maybe instead that people have, that we have a look at those, because we seem to be a little tight on time.
Yes, actually, we had a really interesting question. So it says, do you think the inherent colonial structure of our school boards is a barrier to this work?
100%. Do I need to explain further? No, it really is. It really is, because so often we are having to wait for other people to make decisions on our behalf when we know what is needed. And the one thing, just thinking of the other question about school boards and whatnot, we have a lot of allies who are doing the work, and I am so thankful to have so many non-Indigenous people who are passionate about the work that we're doing. I really, truly am. But it's a little different. I shouldn't say but. However, it is different when you have grown up in the community. I grew up in my community. The only time I didn't live in my community was when I went off to post-secondary. But in coming back, in living that life and having all of the knowledge that I've been able to garner over the years, it sometimes is frustrating for myself and other leads who are Indigenous that we are still having to get permission all the time to do things that we know are right. that we know is needed. We know that kids need this. Let us work towards that. But anyway, that's kind of how it goes sometimes, right? And you know, I have to be very honest and upfront with everybody though. I have been extremely well supported in my board. And I've been very, very fortunate in that way, because a lot of other boards, they haven't had that support from leadership. So I consider myself very, very lucky in that regard. Anyway, are there some other questions? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just looking. Unfortunately, we did have a glitch.
You know what? There was a question I remember seeing on the Jamboard about elders. Are we overtaxing our elders? And that is a great question. Whoever posed that, because there's yes, there's a fatigue happening, I think, within the community, where we have a small number of people who are comfortable. First and foremost, we have a lot of people that hold a lot of knowledge, but not everyone is comfortable in sharing that. So one of the things that we have to do is be mindful of who we're inviting into our classrooms and into our schools, and who's doing some of the work with us, because they get tired. And we have to be respectful of that. So obviously it's a lot different now, because we are all doing things in this manner. But I think there are ways, and if the people that you're used to working with, or your leads are used to working with, if they're open to it, you know, a lot of elders are or knowledge keepers are comfortable online. They have technology and they will use that technology too. So it's still okay. I think it's still good to bring them into this forum. And one of the things that I set up in our district is an Indigenous speaker series, where I'm inviting different speakers to take part in the work that we're doing. And fortunately, all of them have been willing to be recorded. So we have that, so that other classes can share that information, or can access those videos, because not everybody can be online at the same time. So that's another way that we can bring this in. And we might talk about one thing. Let's say it's an author. We had Wabagijik Rice earlier this week, and he may be talking about one of his novels, Moon of the Crusted Snow, for example. But he talked about so many other things, about identity and about, you know, current issues, what it was like for him, the importance of Indigenous languages. He talked about so many other things that crossed so many other curriculum areas, that those are the possibilities that you can.
Sorry, Troy, we're going to be cut off.
Okay.
So I just wanted to, again, yes, so that is wonderful. So if everyone could maybe take the last minute and write down Troy's email, because I know there was some questions that unfortunately CVent was not, it was not working. And I know some of you wanted to ask questions. So Troy has graciously put up his email, and I know I will be emailing you after this session. He's probably sick of hearing from me. But like, I have thoroughly enjoyed all of these ideas, and what I loved most as an educator is these are concrete ideas I can bring into my class. So Nyawen to you, and thank you so much, Troy.
Thank you everyone for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Reach out anytime. Take care.